Okay, well, welcome everyone to the offer presented by Culture Declares Emergency. And as I just said, if you can put your names and organisation in the chat, that would be great so that we can all see who you are. And we will be recording the session, so if you'd rather not appear in that, perhaps turn your camera off. You'll still get the audio, but please make sure you're muted if you're not actually speaking or invited to speak. Culture Declares is a growing global community of arts and cultural champions declaring a climate and ecological emergency. The crisis compels us to imagine new possibilities and to propose systemic change. The vision that the UK cultural sector declares and takes action on the climate and ecological emergency. Mission: to grow and support a diverse community of cultural sector declarers. Values: to tell the truth, to take action, and to seek justice in the face of the emergency. CDE offers an online toolkit to inspire and support pledges, declaration announcements, and follow-up actions. Designed kite marks, banner, leaflets, and sash designs. Community networking on social media and events for declarers to share, grow, and learn. Since its launch in April 2019, over 1,000 individuals and organizations have declared an emergency through CDE. If you haven't yet declared, please do so and get in touch via our website, culturedeclares.org, or if you have any questions. A growing network of culture declaring movements now include music, architecture, heritage, and tourism. CDE works in solidarity with declaring movements globally to raise collective visibility and increase the urgency of our shared message. The offer is in response to the context of the coronavirus and the devastating impact it has had on our society, and not least on the creative and cultural community. It is a space for anyone involved in or interested in the cultural response to the climate and ecological emergency to gather, to question, to share, and to support each other. It will be happening bi-weekly from today at 11 AM until 12:30, and with the opportunity for evening sessions too. So if anyone is interested in making an offer and leading a session, please do get in touch via email at culturedeclares@gmail.com or through our social media. On Wednesday, the 10th of June, Culture Declares presented its strategy for powerful resilience and networked movement building. Thanks to all those who attended and the enthusiastic response. Going forward, 3 working groups are being established: strategic change making, actions and events, and communications. The next working group meetings will take place next week at the following times: Tuesday, the 7th of July, 9 till 10:30 AM, strategic change making. Wednesday, the 8th of July, 9 till 10:30 AM, communications, and Thursday, the 9th of July, 9 till 10:30, actions and events. And they'll continue bi-weekly from then onwards. The groups are a place for you to connect with others, to share your ideas, skills, and passions, and be supported and to take action. Please register to join one of the meetings. You can contact group coordinators if you have any questions on the following emails: culturedeclares.strategy@gmail.com, culturedeclares.comms@gmail.com, and culturedeclaresactions@gmail.com. I'll put the dates and the emails in the chat. The creative and cultural community deal with the art of the possible. Collectively, we can influence more than just sustainable ways of being, doing, and thinking. Your involvement, however big or small, is valuable and essential. Thank you. I'll now pass over to Heather, who will introduce today's The Offer.
Oh, thanks, Dan, and thanks everybody for being here. I think our preamble is getting longer as Culture Declares evolves. And it's very exciting that we have set up these working groups, and it's for you, for our community. So please, please, please do come and join. Your presence and your voice is hugely welcome. So I'm delighted to present The Offer, Reimagining the City. And this actually is a second episode. And very exciting to be working with Zena Edwards, Tyrone Huggins, Claire MacDonald, and I will introduce a little bit more about their biographies in 1 second. So just as a quick introduction about how we've approached this offer this morning. Our streets are layered with histories, echoes of the past, cracks in the pavement and unplanned seedlings. Taking a metaphorical walk, we share observations as we slipstream between South London and Bordsley Green in Birmingham towards a destination that inhabits the past and summons the present. Through poetic text, readings and recollection, we ask how we might reimagine our streets, urban gardens and shared communal spaces in a time of climate and ecological emergency. Zena Edwards was raised in Tottenham, North London. Zena has become known as one of the most unique voices of performance poetry to come out of London. She has published in several anthologies, including Dance the Guns to Silence, Flippy DI Publishing. Zena uses song, traditional African instrumentation, and call and response is prevalent in her live performance as part of her ethos of using performance poetry to create community movements. Her writing passion focuses on social and environmental issues, race, power, human frailty and resilience. And Zena has been mentoring young and emerging artists in professional artist development and creative campaigning for social justice since 2010. As a multidisciplinary collaborator, Zena has worked with internationally acclaimed choreographer and dancer Akram Khan, Zenos, visual artist, Theaster Gates, Soul Manufacturing Company, and radical filmmaker Fahim Alim, Riots Reframed and The Last Poets. Her company Verse in Dialogue champions the arts as servant to community and as a tool for radical change, verseindialogue.com. Zena, in her words, I am in the business of narratives and storytelling that counter violent dehumanization, that builds community. My medium for this rehumanization is the arts as a space for dialogue, envisioning, reimagining, focus. And I welcome Zena. Tyrone Huggins co-founded the influential experimental visual company Impact Theatre Cooperative in Leeds. He is an actor and playwright, appearing in more than 90 theatre productions, and has written 17 performance pieces, including The Honeyman and Sounds in Session. He is an artistic associate at Birmingham Repertory Theatre and the Geraldine Connor Foundation, and is chair of Friction Arts Birmingham, who exists to create cultural and social change through the arts. Welcome, Tyrone. Reverend Claire MacDonald is a Unitarian minister at Lewisham Unity in Lewisham, South London, and a writer with a background in performance, working in social change and art context to explore new ways of doing, being, and meaning through conservation and collective practice. As an activist for change, she is committed to the idea that art, like religion, operates at the moving edge of experience, always edging into what is just beyond what we think we know. Claire was a founder member of Impact Theatre Cooperative. And briefly, I'm Heather Ackroyd. I have a 30-year collaborative multidisciplinary arts practice with Dan Harvey. Prior to that, throughout my 20s, from the 1980s to the 1990s, I was involved with many theatre practices, performance practices, including being a member of Impact Theatre Cooperative. So, we're going to start the session, and I'm going to hand over to Claire.
Thank you, Heather. Before I became a minister, I had a strange and unusual dream. I dreamt that candlelight was the name for a time of day, and that everybody knew what candlelight was. Everyone knew that candlelight was the moment between light and dark when a candle glowed. And in this city where I was in my dream, what happened at candlelight was that everybody simply dropped their bags at the moment that candlelight happened and gathered on a corner and began to sing. And that was the world in which I knew I wanted to be. Here we are in the garden. This is Lewisham Unity, small community where I'm the minister. And when I came to Lewisham Unity in 2017, I found a garden, and in front we planted a peace pole, which is behind Williams, who's the tallest person in that picture, with languages on it spoken by the community. And in the back garden, we began to make a vegetable garden. And then we walked out of the garden and into the streets, and around our walks, we called a project of singing and foraging jam and jam. And we sang the scraps of story that we found, and we made jam from the scraps of stuff that grew on the block where our house and garden sit: brambles and rose petals, apples and rowans, a japonica quince from Culverley Green, pears from our neighbours. And I channeled my mother's hands, tying beans in the sun, digging in the rain, and we made jam. And that was then, and this is now. And then I noticed the names around me, the way that South London is named for hills and vales. Claybank Grove, where my sister lives, St. John's Vale, Lone Pit Vale, Forest Hill, Verdant Lane, Brook Mill. And now, in this time out of time, when the streets look empty and are filling with vehicles, I'm wandering on my bike around those streets. Who and what have we named our world for? What persist? The name's the last thing to disappear, as the poet G.S. Giscombe says. In South London, the vales and hills and dales and groves are long gone, but the names remain. An old council estate is Willowbrook, and the willows still grow over the creek of the Ravensbourne. So much is there as a ghost. Brambles in thick blankets. The streets look empty, but they are layered with histories, echoes of the past, cracks in the pavement, unplaid seedlings. Who walks? Who listens? Who reads the signs? What are the layers that litter the streets? Visible and invisible, the demolitions, the accidents, the street plants, the unofficial routes, the desire paths. Every week I cycle to the garden now to clear the rubbish that's thrown over the walls, soaked clothes, old dinners, bottles, to water the vegetables, to check the space. And as I cycle, I go further and further into the old hills and dales and brookside paths and watercourses, Deptford Creek, the Ravensbourne Valley. And now I think in this time about the space between public and private, about buried voices and prohibitions, and about the layers of voices in those streets. South of the river, the echo of wider spaces, the brooks, the mills, the water still there, the ghost trees, the ghost names. There's so many roots in social to space. And now I'm tuning in to the point where the suburban garden becomes the street. And I'm asking how we want to gather and how we want to travel in those city streets in the future we want to make, and how to voice that history and its possible future. And I'm thinking about plants and seeds, about airborne, waterborne, thrown and spat and strewn, about blessings in the cracks and finding and belonging in unlikely places. And I'm thinking about garden gates. A gate is a whole lot of things other than just a gate. An invitation to climb, a lockout, a keeping out, an opening to pass through. And I'm thinking about spaces between, and I'm thinking about what's there, and I'm thinking about whose hands garden and who gardens and who doesn't, and having space to garden and being denied space to garden and being denied time to garden. And I'm thinking about a story that I heard from a social gardener who had invited some young boys, minors under 18, who traveled here from everywhere, across the Middle East, Afghanistan, airborne, waterborne, finding belonging, and how all of them knew how to garden, and all of them knew how to cook, and all of them lived in a hostel with no place to cook or to garden, and all of them knew how to keep bees. Airborne, waterborne, strewn, finding space to grow. I'm called to garden. I hear my mother's long gone voice, see her hands tying beans in the sun, digging her patch in the rain, and across generation and lines of tuning and heritage and forks and spades. My niece Danielle is the allotment keeper in our family, reminding me of my mother's hands tying beans. John O'Donoghue says that if the first blessing is the beauty of the world, then the second blessing is the beauty of the invisible world, love, connection, meaning. Bob Gilbert says that the blessings are found in the cracks, in the spaces where plants find root, airborne, waterborne, spat, strewn, thrown, where plants find belonging in the space where they find themselves and where they hang on there, flowering for dear life. And the third blessing, mine, is for the beauty of the unofficial countryside, for the ghosts that haunt it, for the space between that's opening up right inside the lines and the lanes of traffic. And this beauty is not perfect, and nor is it wild. It is not. It is gathered in light, and it is gathered in dusk. It's unofficial. Thank you.
Another time, another. Yes, another. I write again, yet another. Why bother? But maybe this time, yes, maybe this time they may listen. I will write another until they listen. I write another. Every time I write when a tree is lost, every time a tree is cut, we are one step closer to oblivion. They cut in oblivion. Dear human, there is a love that I have that is deep within the spirits that reside in the trees. Call me silly. Call me that, and I will Google any tree that you like and show you its spirit. Even if its roots are arriving in the drain pipes, I wait for the breath that they provide. Chlorophyll is a silent friend who never complains. It is the message of breath and life. Yet another. Dear human, this is Mother speaking. I have been concerned about your ways. I have been worried that you do not understand the gateways you are opening, the pathways you are forging that are deceiving so many. There are broken hearts to heal. There is grieving for the children centuries from now. Do you not see how you must release the binds of resentment the youth are now bound to? It is a joy to see them take to the streets in protest for me, over me. Yes, it is moving. Oh, and another. Dear human, dear human, dear human, dear. This is domestic violence and I can stand it no longer. There is another of our cousins to consider, the animal kingdom. They are there besides yourself to consider, so I must say again, I'll send a hurricane, a flash flood, a drought, a mudslide, an earthquake. It is tough love, a spanking. But I do not see you children as individuals. So unfortunately, there are some innocent little sisters and brothers standing by while the house of crime is committed. All oppressions are connected. Blood let in the ocean is blood poison on the soil. Your plans strike me. Dear human, dear human. This evolution is love tormented and anger is the result. A quest for renewal is a call for evolution. Spiritual progress is your mud, is my silt, is my water. And yet another. Dear human, yet another. Your action is admirable. I am proud of the many ways that you ignore me. Those who hold old ways in high. Why do you ignore them? Dear human, I call for temperance and patience. I have been patient. Every city I travel as a poet, I go and check in on the churches. Londonderry's Catholic Cathedral to St. Paul's in Bristol, and St. Chad in South Norwood. I go there to feel the vibes, to hear the worship and the birth dates of trials that sing in the pews and tell me of the stories of the folk who would only have been allowed to read the Bible, when the land would have been another type of scripture, Jesus and pagan rites. The sun would guide actions and thoughts without thinking. What was in the muscle and the sinew, in the dawns and the sunsets that woke the will to rise and to shut down for rest? The moon signaled when to till the soil and plant the seed, a time for watering and take heed of the mini beasts with voracious appetites, a time for yielding harvest, but there was no question. There was no procrastination. That is a luxury that could not be afforded unless you wanted to starve for winter. But if we return to the commons and depoliticize its central ethos, we see humanity working at its core. We can be brave and unburden the word community. This is a quote I've taken from the Commons website. The Commons is a new way to express a very old idea, that some forms of wealth belong to all of us, and that these community resources must be actively protected and managed for the good of all. The commons are the things that we inherit and create jointly, and that will hopefully last for generations to come. The commons consists of gifts of nature such as air, oceans, and wildlife, as well as shared social creations such as libraries, public spaces, and scientific research and creative works. When I went down to Catford to meet up with Heather and Claire to talk about this project, we visited Culverley Green, which is deep in the purr of Catford's past. And I can feel the ghosts of the locals who would have gathered there after a Sunday parish church meeting, how they would have used the herbs from their gardens as kitchen magic. And I tasted some of Claire's jam, and I just thought it's a shame that we do not imbibe of nature in this particular way anymore. The crossfade, the grey and steel, numb, the hard and serrated, caution, stop signs and one ways, denial, the clamour and the jolt, tense, the diggers and the drills, rigid, the bite and the rip, freeze, the bang and the clank, we jump, the train and the crash, tense, the shock and speed, paralysis, the bins overflowing, the decay and the rotting, disgust, the chicken wire and serrated edge, trapped, the concrete and crack, depressed, the dandelion and the nettle, on guard, the patchy clover and simple daisy, small release, the local garden and tender sapling, hope, the bushy border and plane trees, breathe, the horse chestnut, sweet chestnut, birch and sycamore, breathe some more, the open pitch, the path, the hillock, joints unlock, the primrose, elderflower, hyacinth and lavender, natural medicine relief, the local pear tree, cherry, garden plum and apple, someone's homemade jam, the grand oak, towering plane and poplar and linden, myth, story, wisdom. All around is texture and tale, all around. Our body is a sensor, a story antenna. The body is made from what we experience. The body keeps score of all we ingest, what we see, hear, feel. Reverberations surreptitiously sink in. They find their way in through 20 million pores of skin we have on our skin. Our feet have 7,000 plus nerve endings each. That's 14,000 ways to understand the world we live in, the paths we tread. We cannot take this for granted. Environmentally, there is an assault on our body, and every cell in our bodies is eavesdropping on our thoughts. So if green spaces are good for our mental health and well-being, we should be feeding our body thoughts that it can find nourishment in. The body is made up of all the elements: earth, air, fire, and water. The earth is flesh, the air is the breath in our lungs, the fire is the spirit within, and water, 80% of us, our blood. The body is a symbol and a monument to the ever-present loving of our home, this earth, a rock floating in the black space, a living organism pulsing with a fiery core and an icy crown and throne. Her heart boils, and with a yearning to see itself created and recreated and recreated. It doesn't know death as an end, but as a crushing beauty of reignition. Endings. We are at an ending. It is plain to see. The writing is on the many walls of fear. That structure we know, that doesn't understand. The frameworks that have framed us to fail if we are not conforming. Gridlocks that have held societies locked in a dance where the steps are pre-written. Do we follow the script? What is the new normal? I'm left wondering why endings are so fearful, why they generate an anxiety that with power, if you have power, political power, and a lack of moral principle, can instigate the most destructive ambitions. I get to look out of my window and I am fortunate enough to see the trees, a pear tree, a sycamore tree, an evergreen, a silver birch. No, wait, the silver birch was cut down. There is a space there and I can see the tower at Crystal Palace, a spike in the grey, sometimes dazzling blue. There are spaces I am seeing far too often these days, as real estate of the patriarch's coffers offers a global stage of economic prowess, and us, collateral damage in the wake of metal boots that stomp through our heartlands and family dinners, see a land grab for real estate and an ambition for space in cubic meters. It's a colonial overweight, a heavy weight with the hunger of an illusory wealth, as if a bottomless belly of a towering dark beast that is hunchback, its core hiding its red eyes, its saliva dripping teeth, jagged and caked with property's truth. Only Grenfell knows well. We are expendable as long as there is space to be expandable. We used to take walks in the park and contemplate the balance between city bustle and the rustle of grass underneath our feet. Now our eyes are skimming the city skyline at the top of Parliament Hill, seeking the valuable green spaces. And our weekend love banter is full of stats, facts, and corporate responsibility, big bucks drowning under Stephen Hawking's prediction of our 100-year mortality, our finality. The gods' politics. London is a Russian bowl of history, layer upon layer of pox, famine, feudal ruin upon the commons, and fiery revolution washed by the sins of a plaguing plutocracy. Layer upon layer of industry, imperial expansion at the hest of Hephaestus, the Greek god of blacksmith, metalwork, and carpentry, and Hermes, god of trade and business, and a more efficient postal service has proven this season. Brutal creation is the rationale behind homes built with meager expiration dates and we are expected, no, relentlessly socialized to accept or feel powerless under the rising numbers of homeless and the shrinking square meters we pay rising rent and mortgage prices for. I have not reached the part of the story that speaks of the green spaces that really do dwindle and the glaring touch of Mars. Not only the planet we threaten to colonize, but an aggressive god of grinding war that dog whistles the few who vote for privatizing its own homeland. Also, there are ley lines that cobweb the city and catch us as flies in their slipstreams. There's magic in the ground, in the roots of the trees, and we no longer go barefoot. When I think about ley lines, I think about the magic that is there for us to tap into. It is there speaking to us to inspire and inform us of how we move forward from now on. And I believe that it is protecting our green spaces and petitioning our governments and local councillors to pay attention to the green spaces and to allow people to have more access to gardening, to community gardens and allotments, so that we can reconnect with the earth, so that we can look at where our food comes from. It doesn't just fall out of the sky. It doesn't just come pre-packed in plastic, because a lot of our young people, unfortunately, are losing contact with where our food comes from. But I think about the ley lines. There's one in Finsbury Park. I've always thought it had a strange energy. There is actually a sacred mound there and a ring of trees that is near the running track. There's also a natural spring. And the caretaker would always chase me and my friends away from the tap where the natural spring came out when we had hot summers, when we went there to play tennis and play in the adventure playground. This is where we find gems of nature's abundance. Where else are we building upon sacred sites? We are trees. Our ancestors' souls lace the branches. Paper lanterns strung as pathways through the boughs guide the climb to the highest fruit closest to the sun and protect them from thieves and appropriators trading on the superhighways of tangled roads to success, trying to stay relevant.
In Culverley Green, Zena, Claire and I stood under the tree amongst the haze of lime blossom. At Claire's invitation, I plucked a leaf and I tasted its tanginess. This was my first experience of eating the lime leaf. From the pollen and the nectar of the linden tree, a type of greenish perfumed honey is obtained. Claire recommended Bob Gilbert's wonderful book, Ghost Trees, and he describes the fragrance of the tree. A lime in full bloom can be alive with the thrumming of feeding insects, and how there are stories of bees becoming so intoxicated by the flowers, they fall unconscious to the ground, a sight of drunken bees. Ghost Trees describes how when the Germanic tribes, the Angles, the Saxons and the Jutes invaded England, they had brought with them the associations of a tree that was central to their culture. By the Middle Ages, it had been implanted into English folklore and was seen as a distinctly female tree. And the lime became a trysting place for lovers who lay beneath it on a bed of crushed and sweetly scented flowers. It was probably from Germany too that the practice of planting the lime tree in ornamental avenues was borrowed. However, as my now treasured book tells me, the idea of the avenue goes back much farther to the Bronze Age and of beacon-making people who began linking their burial sites with long ceremonial avenues of trees, such as those that crisscross Stonehenge. One day, I flicked the back of Ghost Trees. I'm a restless reader. I look up Southwark in the index. I'm thinking of Global Generations, the paper garden, where they're growing fruit and veg on the former Daily Mail printing works. I'm thinking of Dilston Grove in Southwark Park, where in 2003, Dan and I grew the interior of a deconsecrated church, the first church made of concrete in London with living grass. In Bob's book, I find a number of entries under Southwark and head towards page 299 for no other reason than I like the number, where I meet a woman I had never heard of, now long dead, yet she echoes from the past, and she resonates with earlier daydreaming when I lived in a block of council flats on St. Matthew's Road in Brixton in the 1980s. Ada Salter and her husband were revered local figures in Bermondsey. The Salters were Quakers who had come to live in the poorest of boroughs and had devoted themselves to the people. Alfred was a brilliant doctor who settled for being the local GP there, offering his services for free for those who could not pay. His local engagement led to political activism and to his election as a local councillor and eventually a local MP. Ada was also to become a Bermondsey councillor and later the borough's mayor, the first woman mayor in London. Their dedication came at high personal cost. Committing themselves to share the lives of the poor around them, they had declined to remove their daughter Joyce from the local school when outbreaks of scarlet fever swept through the borough, even though they could have afforded to send her away. She contracted the disease 3 times and died of it in 1910. She was just 8 years old. One of Ada's great works in Bermondsey was a beautification committee. She believed that you could only be truly human by valuing nature and that the cultivation of flowers and trees is a civic duty. She set out to ensure that there were trees in every street and alley in the borough and flowers on every square and churchyard. Aiming to make every front garden a flower garden, she provided seeds, bulbs, seedlings and window boxes and encouraged their planting in tenement windows, on balconies, in forecourts and on landings. Such was her success that in May 1931, the Observer reported of this previously squalid and desolate place that outside the royal parks, it would be difficult anywhere to find such masses of colour. As for trees, the Tree of Heaven was one of Ada's personal favourites, and she pioneered its planting on the borough's previously barren streets. According to the magazine The Countryman, there were 383 trees of heaven by the late 1920s. They constituted the 3rd most planted tree in the borough after the black Italian poplar and the London plane. Both the Beautification Committee and the use of the Tree of Heaven for urban street planting were models followed widely across other British European cities. Could I have a slide, please? Kelly. A plaque beside a bronze statue of Ada on Bermondsey Wall declares, "Those who plant trees love others beside themselves." And it's a fitting tribute to the woman who so tirelessly worked for socialism with flowers. Ada's Beautification Committee speaks to me. I recall in the 1980s, whilst I was living on the 5th floor of St. Matthew's Road Council Block in Brixton, having this idea to distribute window boxes, seeds of flowers, herbs and vegetables to all of my neighbours. 8 floors and over 50 flats with a cornucopia of blooms. The vision in itself seemed to feed my imagination, and the actuality of distributing the seeds and window boxes to my neighbours never actually materialised. Instead, one day, I installed a life-size grass camel in the front communal garden. In 1988, next slide please. Are we showing images? No images yet? Don't worry.
Oh, no images. I don't know if Kelly's have problems there.
Doesn't matter. I'd like to show some images, so I might just try and bring them up now. Here we go. Are we sharing?
Not yet.
Pardon? Did that show? Don't worry, we can just use our most wonderful imaginations. Instead, one day, I installed a life-size grass camel in the front of the communal garden of where I lived. In 1988, I was immersed in devising a performance piece called Uses of Enchantment, about the mythical garden and the corruption of innocence through desire and eating from the tree of knowledge. In my research, I had discovered an 11th century text, the Persian Zendavesta, a Zoroastrian holy scripture, where the serpent in the garden is described as a flying camel with a serpent-like neck. I was inspired, and with the support of a fellow sculptor, Jackie Pennell, a life-size grass camel was made, and I grew the grass skin in my council flat. As the green grass bleached to a camel-like straw during one of the hottest years on record, NASA scientist James E. Hansen provided what's considered the first warning to a mass audience about global warming, the greenhouse effect it was then called, when in June 1988, he told a US congressional hearing he could declare with 99% confidence that a recent sharp rise in temperatures was as a result of human activity. In 1988, 20 billion tons of carbon dioxide was being emitted into the atmosphere. 30 years later, and global carbon emissions are expected to hit an all-time high in 2019, or they have hit an all-time high in 2019. Scientists say smashing a previous record set in 2018. By the end of the year, emissions from industrial activities and the burning of fossil fuels will pump an estimated 36.8 billion metric tons of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. On reflection, I sometimes wish I had had my Ada moment. I wish I had distributed seeds to my neighbours, excuse me, encouraged them to grow them and shared the beautification of our council block. But I was held slightly enthralled to the garden and to the camel and to global change, global climate change. Just last Friday, whilst talking with my friend Edwina, she told me that in Brixton, they now have a community orchard. And in fact, when I looked at this, it's just around the corner from where I live, literally 10, 20 yards. And I was so excited to be able to look at this place and to see that in 2018, over 35 different fruit trees were planted. And the timing of the orchard is fitting, as you may have heard, that the intersection of Brixton Road and Cold Harbour Lane broke the EU legal limits on nitrogen dioxide 120 hours into 2017, making it the most polluted road in London during the first week of January that year. So this orchard serves to provide fruit, to provide jam, to provide a place where people can sit under an apple tree. It provides a place where they can eat an apple as they pluck it from the tree. It is one of many gardens and extraordinary initiatives that have been set up since 2014 by Urban Growth London. And the more I look on the site, the more excited and the more I feel some sense of relief and some sense of gratitude for the work that they are doing. It's an open space. It's about the communal land. It's about the commons, and it's about the right to fresh air. It's about our right to a thriving biosphere, and it's about our right to pick up a fallen apple and eat it.
The journey from my flat to my garden begins with a walk downstairs, out my flat door, the building door, turn right and right again, through a shared gate, then another gate, and into the garden of my dreams. How often I wish this was just a step across a threshold. For a shorter journey to nature, last year I attached a window box outside my living room window. I grew parsley, fennel, thyme, coriander, and now a tomato plant from my nephew. At university, he was a real junk food activist. His garden now is on a journey towards vegetarian self-sufficiency. My walk to the window box has taken air miles out of the journey to my garden. During COVID-19 lockdown, in the heat wave of May 2020, I trudged to my garden in the hopeful possibility that I may now begin to make an impression on the bomb peck it has been for the 18 years since I moved in. It is not the garden of my dreams. Previous attempts to tame it have included smothering it in thick black polythene, a trick I picked up from a friend's large garden in France one time. I was given the job of spreading out this massive sheet of polythene on the field one cold, windy February day in exchange for the keys to her cottage and seclusion to write. Over the following years, she would slit the plastic strategically and plant down through it tactically, removing more and more of the covering until eventually she revealed a luminescent garden of flowers, vegetables, and herbs erupting out of the heavy, black French soil. After 5 years of trying with my garden. I removed the polythene, realizing my vague planting strategy and inattention had withered without results. My friend had green thumbs. Sitting and studying the soil in May, I had to accept that for a good 6 inches of depth, the earth was mainly crumbled bricks, fractured concrete, porcelain fragments, glass shards, and rusted wire mattress springs that had become twisted into impermeable clay and the acid sand that only the ants seemed to thrive on. The soil beneath my feet was not soil, but the dumping ground for building works from the early 1990s, when Birmingham City Council converted rows of 3-bed terraced houses into flats to reduce the loss of domiciles caused by right to buy. I bought my diminutive flat next door to the house I was brought up in, to block a buy-to-let landlord whose disrepute was already established by his ownership of the house on the other side of the family home. When we'd moved there in the 70s, the house had a cherry tree, apple and pear trees, and several chicken hutches with attendant manure spread liberally around. This was evidence of a post-war self-sufficiency which was already on the wane from the culture. Our previous home, a back-to-back terraced house in Nechells, was erased from the landscape during the most extensive demolition of those type of houses anywhere in the country, leaving only the National Trust-owned back-to-backs as evidence that the city ever had such housing. As a teenager, I had worked on the Bullring Market for White's, where we sold house and garden plants, cabbage, cauliflower and lettuce seedlings, strawberry plants and fruit trees, meaning our house and garden was well supplied with growing things. Later, in the mid-90s, during one of my sojourns from London or Manchester or Leeds, I returned to live in the family home for a short while, where I rotivated the rich chicken guano-fed soil, sieving out stones, tidying up the roses, laying out flowers and herb beds, and over a 4-year period experienced the practical, emotional, and aesthetic satisfaction of a well-ordered garden before leaving once again the house that my mother by then inhabited alone. Now living in the flat next door, my Bompek garden in Bawdsley Green was defeating me. Time for a walk. The name Bawdsley Green, according to a local historian, was first recorded as Le Grain de Beaudesley in 1285 as a demesne pasture belonging to the lord of the manor. The green was probably located at the junction of Cattle Road and Garrison Lane, now made famous or infamous in Peaky Blinders. Bawdsley Green was adopted as the name of a long road at the eastern limits of the growing city of Birmingham, later adopted as the name of the area. By the 1910s, Francis Daniels, a migrant to Birmingham from Stroud, had set up the Ideal Benefit Society, providing affordable social security and pensions. Then it moved into housing provision, commencing with the building of the Ideal Village, designed for artisan workers. The concept was of a rural village with an ideal village park at the center of the plans, and with tree-lined streets, much of which remain this day. This has similarities with the work of Ada Salter in the 1920s and her beautification committee in Bermondsey. Both ideas recognizing the social benefits of good housing connected to a green environment. On my walk, the greatest change I observed in the Ideal Village is the number of front gardens that have been denuded of plant life and slabbed or decoratively bricked or concreted over concreted over a recommendation my neighbor offers me several times a year as a solution to the difficulty of parking in our cul-de-sac opposite a hospital. This lots of front gardens is a national trend identified in a report by The Independent in 2012, headlined 7 million front gardens lost to car parking space. Is this the trend destined to continue when electric cars need to get closer to home charging points? I wonder. Alongside my own walk, I join another as a kind of lockdown treat, a virtual walk following the route Claire, Heather and Zena shared together, starting at the Unity Garden in Bromley Road, ambling chaotically to Thornbeach Road, a few streets away, as I struggled to master Google Street View. What this technology lacks in physical exercise, spiritual well-being, or the inner tranquility gained from the wholesome contemplation of a peace pole in the garden under construction, it makes up for in mental exhaustion, digital lag and frustration, and the constant sensation of being limited, being channeled away from engagement, from smell, from touch, from a breeze, or the possibility of sharing a moment's observation with another person, constantly being subverted away from the path of my desire. Google Street View is not an easy way to travel anywhere, but like climbing a mountain, I do it because it's there. This mode of being somewhere conjures up some intriguing observations. After a while, going hither and thither in this digital virtual world, it becomes clear that by turning a corner in a street, you move to a different era, another time. In one street, the trees are neatly coppiced. Turn a corner and there are untamed branches shooting energetically up from the base of the trees. Investigating Street View reveals that one set of photographs is from June 2019, whilst the next are from June 2015. Further exploration leads to a panel where the 360-degree photographs from a specific geolocation can be cross-faded, moving forwards and backwards in time between 2015 and 2019. This is a modern-day archaeology for our future times. In 100 years, when the ants of crumbled brick and concrete to sand will, looking back through Street View, capture my journey. The Street View Road sign for Thornbeach Road in 2012 shows a bush peeking its leaves from behind the brick walls with some younger foliage creeping up alongside it. 3 years later, the views show a Carolina cherry laurel beginning to cover the road sign and a paper plant proudly drooping alongside it. While in the background can be seen a full and healthy looking European fan palm. I know this because an app on my phone taking a picture of this past world on my screen has correctly or incorrectly identified them. Re-emerging from the rabbit hole of the technology, I resume my virtual perambulations. I noticed from Street View that though front gardens here have been turned into car parks as everywhere, fewer in comparison with the ideal village have followed that path. Could it be that the more comprehensive public transport system and the many penalties in London has downward pressure on car ownership? Birmingham has always relished its reputation as the UK's motor city, but the City Council is attempting to put a dampener on that and has recently sent out its transport plan for consultation. Quote, large swathes of the city were redesigned to handle more and more road traffic, creating urban environments that were hostile, intimidating, and unhealthy. End quote. Carbon neutral Birmingham by 2030? Hard to say if the arrival on platform 2026 of HS2 will balance out for the vast areas of green destruction needed to clear its path to a station near me. The word is out on the streets. The Londoners are coming, inflating house prices and bringing their strange ways, such as expecting people to stand on the right on escalators. It is not in the culture of Birmingham to be in such a rush. Linger, have a gas about the weather or the bullring or the council. All conversations lead to the council here. You know it's the biggest metropolitan council in Europe, don't you? Oh, we've left Europe. I've heard somewhere that poplar is a popular tree in certain parts of London. In Poplar, I hear. In the ideal village park, I hunt around for one, finding black locust, sycamore, silver maple, American elm, common persimmon, common oak, Japanese pagoda, common huckberry, and many large-leaved lime trees lining Bawdsley Green, the road. The poplar has branches raised up to the heaven, revealing a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. It is a popular working wood, inexpensive and fairly easy to work, and is often used for crates, upholstered furniture frames, pallets, pulpwood, and as a core layer in finer plywood. It is one of the most common utility hardwoods, best used unseen. It is not listed in the appendices of the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species, CITES. Interestingly, black poplar trees can live for 200 years. White poplar trees have a lifespan of 30 to 50 years, according to the internet. It was in the nature of small island peoples of the Caribbean to grow and nurture plants for food, aesthetics, and serenity. Growing circles have always been here, cycles of growing, groups of black people connecting with the earth, the soil, the loam, the dust of our dust. In Birmingham, the Black Environment Network, BEN, set up to promote equality of opportunity with the ethnic minority community in the preservation, protection, and development of the environment has not lasted. A tree falling in the wood, perhaps. While in London, the Ubeli Initiative has supported the formation of Black Roots, the first multi-generational Black-led growing project in the UK, growing fruit and vegetables such as sweet potatoes and squashes. Still a sapling of a project, but with good conditions for growing to maturity. At the allotments opposite the ideal village in Bawdsley Green, Asian men come and go as lockdown eases and the litter grows. Young people learn from older people learn from young people, and all learn from nature. Or do we learn from the radio, the television, the internet, or from experience, or what we are told, or what we read in the papers, the Daily Mail? Was that a COVID cough I heard? Not all things that grow are alive, science tells us. In my garden, no trees are falling. Hardly a thing grows, which is not true. Wild things grow vigorously in the cracks between how I wish my garden was and what it actually is. I raise my hands to heaven, praying for the pot of gold to buy me new, loamy, black French soil to cover this blasted heath. Maybe the tree of heaven is my solution. Its stinky leaves would be a fit perfume in this rubble. It grows in stubborn alkaline soil and is resistant to almost all pests and diseases. A perfect option for a gardener with brown thumbs. Begin the continuum again, if that is possible. Begin the Mobius strip from the beginning. Science tells us that time is a continuum. We follow the heresy of science at our peril. Do not believe it. Understand and assess it, for it describes only the physical world. It separates functionality from spirituality. The earth is more than geology and wave patterns and digital history. It is a spiritual being, God to some, sprites and tree spirits to others. Viruses may not be alive, but we are, until we come to the end of our journey.
And so, at this point, I feel it is time for us to do that thing that we do very naturally, but we can do in a more conscious way. Take advantage of the air that we have right now. As clean as it has been, a little bit cleaner since COVID, since there hasn't been so much smog and planes flying over. But for us to take a breath now, to take a deep breath in. In fact, before we do that, let's just, loosen up the neck, roll our neck. We spend so much time in our heads sometimes, just to roll our necks out, roll our shoulders, and then to take There we go. Yes, some nice stretching going on there. Let's continue with that. I've got all my joints cracking right now. You can hear them, they're all popping. Okay, so let's just take a deep breath in, everyone. And hold and out through the mouth. And in through the nose. And out through the mouth. One more time. And out through the mouth. We've had a lot of words now, a lot alluding to, I feel, the beauty of what it means to be human, our humanity, and our ideas for progress and evolution and reconnection. And I just wanted to very quickly do this. I made this a request before we actually started. I actually pulled tarot cards. I'm just going to do a quick shuffle and let's see what we come up with. If you're all keen for that, if you're open. Oh, two fell out. Okay. And what we have, if you can see it, is the Star card. And the Star card is a card of hope, actually, and faith and healing. It's about recognizing our talents and an opportunity to just pause and think about what it is that we want to do for the future. And as you can see, this is a peace dove. So I think that's very appropriate. And on the bottom of the deck, because I always look at the bottom, we have the Fool card. And the Fool card is about new beginnings, radical new beginnings, and doing it quite freely and carefree and unburdened with any guilt or blame or shame that we can carry from the past into the future, and just to do everything refreshed again. So I think personally, these two cards are great to have right about now. And I hope you don't mind me doing that. So I believe we're going to go into the next part of the offer. And thank you, everybody.
Yeah, Zena, that was great. I love that. The Star and the Fool. Really.
The Star and the Fool.
Yeah, it's great. So yeah, we're going to go into breakout groups. We're not actually, you know, there's a lot of beautiful words and thoughts, and slipping back into the past. And I suppose now we are tasked and entrusted with, tasked with the present and entrusted with the future. So what do we draw from this? In the small working groups, it's more just to kind of share your reflections and your observations, but also, you know, please do keep sharing on chat any fantastic initiatives that you know of. People are already putting that up. Connections, we keep it around the gardens, the trees, the greens, the commons, the shared open spaces.
Hi there, I'm Barty. I'm an artist, and I was grouped together with somebody I was in the first group with, so we've become first name friends now. And we talked about, I've got things in common with Tyrone. I'm from Leeds, and I've adopted Birmingham as my home now. I've lived here for 23 years. And we talked about Birmingham, and Bordsley Green is not how Tyrone describes it, the ideal village. I really struggle to imagine what that was like. If you think of ideal villages in terms of Birmingham, you think of places like Bourneville. So Bourneville is a model village which was built around the Cadbury chocolate factory, and each garden there had 1/3 of an acre with fruit trees. All the street names are named after trees. So we've got Linden Road, Acacia Avenue, etc. And so we had this really interesting conversation about gardens and suburbs as well. I heard something on the radio a day or so ago that the suburb is going to be a sort of rejuvenated place post-COVID, because we are no longer needing to go into town or into the city, and the suburb is the new local. So that was where our conversation was about, really, about local, about gardens, and about Birmingham in particular.
That's great. Thank you, Barty. Would anybody else like to make discuss? Can you see anybody there, Kelly, just in case I'm missing anyone? Is that Morris Davies? I can see a finger. Yeah? No, no, you just kind of, I think you're playing with the sound. Oh yeah, Zena.
Just very quickly, we were speaking about the idea of space and community being connected to space, and how there aren't so many public spaces right now, with so many community centres closing down, youth centres closing down. So for us to have discussions about greening our communities and building more community gardens, etc. The community gardens are outside, but there are not so many public spaces where people can come together so that we can have a sense of community, because community can be so transient. And I think it was, Izzy mentioned how there was a concern that since COVID, there's been a lot of spaces that have closed down and charity spaces that have closed down, and to try and be hopeful. I hope I'm not paraphrasing you right, Izzy, but that we hope that these spaces will open up again, because we're starting to get so used to doing things online. And I think there's that human connectivity, literally that energetic, physical connection of being in each other's presence, which is what can help bind our combined communities, something like that.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. I've just put that into chat as well. We have just 1 minute left if anybody wants to make a really pressing key point. Otherwise, we will just take another breath. And
Kelly is...
Kelly? Yeah, Kelly.
A very quick one is that I'd like to see the cities become more like the suburbs, and the green spaces start invading into the centre of cities, so that the city and the suburbs aren't seen as separate, but actually, you know, places that begin to merge and mingle, and that people feel. One of my favourite things during lockdown was going for a cycle through all the royal parks, and then through the centre of London, and it was just bicycles and families and no cars, and it was just almost like the most beautiful time I've ever seen London, and I'd love London to be like that in the future.
Thank you.
And other cities as well.
Yeah.
Can I just add to that there is a competition at the moment, the prize to transform the future. I've put a link into the chat. That is quite London centric, I'm afraid to say, but some people might be interested in that.
And there's no reason why, if something's imagined for London, that you could also imagine it for Birmingham or Glasgow or Leeds or Sheffield. What a wonderful garden city Sheffield is. So
that's wonderful. Okay, so I'm just putting prize to transform the future. The link. And we are going to have to draw our meeting to a close. So I just want to give incredibly warm thanks for everybody to be here and sharing this with us this morning. Particular thanks to Tyrone, Zena and Claire for their extraordinary contributions. Food for the soul, provocations for the activism, and we look forward to the next meeting. Can I just add that the offer is for this community, and there is a space for an offer at the moment in 2 weeks' time on July the 15th. So if you or your group or your community would like to curate that one, please get in touch, because it is there. And we thank you all very, very much, and stay safe, stay well, and we'll see you again.